Hello, my name is Raquel. I go by Raquel B across the internets, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be painting some oranges in gouache. So I am first starting out with a light pen sketch. I like to use like pen or ballpoint pen because it just doesn't move, doesn't smudge like graphite does. And then I've always sketched with pens, so this is just out of habit. That pen there I used is like a lefty pen, so that's why it has that bend in the front. Or towards the it doesn't matter what kind of pen. It's light. And here I'm showing you my mixing palette. This is my travel gouache set, and it had some old paint in there, so I'm mixing them together to make the thin washes that I'm going to use for the underpainting. Sometimes the underpainting will show when I do gouache paintings, and sometimes they get fully covered up. When I do underpaintings, I kind of treat it like watercolor. So I am doing really, really thin washes of paint, and gouache does act like watercolor once you thin it down. And I am denoting the shadows and the form shapes. The reference photo that I used was from Unsplash, and it was a set of these oranges and kind of had like a background. If I remember, I will pop in the reference here. If I remember to. If I don't, use your imagination. I'm also trying to kick out some of that white of the paper, kind of give everything overall more texture and more color than just white paper. I do also tape off the paper, and it's not holding down the paper. This is my sketchbook. This is in my sketchbook. The sketchbook is a watercolor sketchbook. I forgot by whom, but it is an 8x8, so it is a square. And I clip the sides down, but I also use tape to get sharp edges, so there's like kind of a framing within the sketchbook. I don't do it for every image in the sketchbook, but if I'm going to do a full page, sometimes I try to, because it just looks nice. It looks neat. And if I want to scan it for later, it makes it easier to digitize and edit. And I'm out in the cafe while doing this. That's why I'm using my travel set. And you can see that little black cord was my headphones. This palette has a little bit of paper. That's like a napkin that I put the paint on. And I first dunk the paper into the water to get it damp. And then it keeps my paints wet for a longer time. And then you can just re-wet it. And I'll reuse the same paper until it like is shriveled up and non-useful. And I was just go back and you can look at what colors I was mixing. I'll go over it because it'll pop up again. I try to show my paint palette there. And this is once again the underpainting, and I'm using a deeper blue because with gouache I do work from dark to light. So I'm getting in the shapes here of the branch stem. I don't know what you call it. I'm not a botan. Is that botany? I think that's the word. Science of plants. Botany. Oh, I don't know. I can look. I'm not going to. And then I do it with a square brush that is kind of not too small, but it's also not very big. When I was laying in the first like backgrounds and stuff, I was using a bigger one because I was trying to cover more area. When it comes to painting, you want to get the right brush size according to what you're trying to paint. So if what you're trying to paint is larger in detail, you probably want to try to take a stab at it with a bigger brush. And some of this will peek through and some of it won't. But I'm going through and adding it here. I decided on blue because it's the opposite kind of orange. And I thought it just looks like a nice contrast. That's why I use that as my underpainting. And then I'm just showing my gouache paints that I use. That's a Winsor & Newton designer gouache. They don't come with the color on top of the tube. What I ended up doing is taking the actual paint out of the tube, painting it on the outside of it, like near the top, on that little flap, like the folded over flap, and then putting like clear nail polish over top of it so I could see it in like my art bag, because it was just a bunch of white tube tops whenever I looked inside my pouch of paints because I only have like 6 or 7 of them. And here I am mixing up an orange, and it's first very vibrant and bright. And that's the yellow and the reds, and I do add a little bit of other colors to it to darken it. I think it was the purple. I probably should go back and look. I was talking. Whoops. And I'm working more thickly. If you notice, the paint is more opaque. It's more of like a, I want to say maybe a hot chocolate. I don't know. Because it's not super thick. Like, we're not working like pudding consistency. I tend to not work super thick with gouache. Well, designer gouache anyways, because it helps with the layering. If you go too thick, because it's water soluble still, it'll reactivate. And then it becomes a pain in the neck. So I'm first adding in these darker oranges. And with that same square. Fighting for my life here, trying to get this shape. And also, you see how it kind of ends up being dry brushy. It's because I just didn't have enough paint on my brush. So I keep going back because I don't continue to not have enough paint until now. And I'm like, finally, let me get the edge I want. Because one thing about painting is you want to have control over your brush and like how many strokes you're going to be doing. And when looking at that pool of paint, there's multiple colors, so I didn't like make it homogeneous, and actually made it lighter because I'm working on the other side. So I added some yellow to the previous shadow color, and because they're still both damp, they're gonna blend. With just look at that, 1 or 2 strokes and they already blended. I don't have to do too much because they're both wet. And I'm working out the shape here because if I'm holding one hand is painting, the other hand is holding my phone. And I can see that the roundness is off. So I'm trying to paint that and make sure it is accurate. And it's still kind of a looser texture. I do most of my final details more thickly so they're more pronounced. And I'm not worried too much about the leaves or the stem that's crossing because I will be going over with a darker green, which I'm making right now. And that is sap green. And I'm adding a little bit of red. Well, trying to do a little bit. That red is so strong. Look at that. So I'm adding red to desaturate it and can neutralize it. And I'm like, yeah. I always do that. So you just got to add more green back. Sap green is a very potent, vibrant green. That's why I like it, because then you can desaturate it or thin it out with water. And it just makes it easier, especially since I paint a lot of plants and botanicals. It saves me time from having to continually have to mix a green. And then other greens I find they're not as vibrant as I like because they're usually like super blue or cool in tone. And so when I want a vibrant leaf, it's very hard to fight that when the original green is not bright, but well, at least for me. So it's easier for me to desaturate and cool down like the warmth of the sap green versus trying to add warmth to a cool green. That's just how it kind of works for me. And I'm still having that milky, is it milky? Yeah, like chocolate, like hot chocolate, milky consistency to the paint. And I moved on to the section of the stems and leaves as the oranges dry. Because even in gouache, the layering process and the drying time is important because it helps with your details and textures. If I wanted to add another layer of highlights onto the orange, it'd still be wet and they would kind of, blur out and be too goopy, for lack of a better word. So I am moving on to the leaves to give it enough time to dry. That way I don't have to wait between layers. I just work in different sections. So a lot of people, the way I work is by color area and not specifically like from top to bottom, or or like foreground, middle ground, background. I'm like, no, I work from, I do work, from, I guess, a little bit foreground, middle ground, background, but so I work the background first, and that's just because of the opacity. So I work off of, when I look at an image and how I'm going to paint it, how I determine where I work and what part I work it at is just determining what technique I'm going to use for each part. So if a part is the techniques lend more to less opacity, they go first. Because the stuff that require or use more opacity can easily layer over and you will still have a clear image kind of deal. And then go from there. So usually backgrounds go first because they have the least amount of opacity because they're not the focal point. And then the subjects come up next. And I work them in tandem because of the drying times between things. So me adding this more red-orange in, because it kind of denotes the subsurface scattering that you have on an orange, especially like a really ripe one, and blending it into the damp page, it would act differently if it was super wet like it was before. It would spread instead of glazing over like I wanted. So that's why now that it's more dry, the paint before is more dry, I can lay it over as a glaze, and I'm not agitating the paint too much because then it will start to mix and blend in a way that I don't want. So that's why it's a lot of pat, 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 pat. Now I'm adding some white to this orange yellow area. And I think what helps with my painting's color harmony is because I'm always working in the same area for the similar colors. So that orange area, I haven't actually removed the paint. I just added more paint to it. So it continually has the similar colors, and I'm just mixing. And I'm just patting it over this even lighter to add more dimension and deciding what I want. And it layers over beautifully because the paint below it is dry and the time has passed, because I'm not continually recording. I'm like taking some footage and dropping it and then continue what I'm doing to smooth and add the strokes and add shadows, and then I'll come back. So that previous layer is now dry, and you see I'm adding I added a little bit more white to that previous pool of paint or swatch of paint, so I can now do the highlights. And I'm also just waiting for it to dry a little bit, and I wiped off my brush so that I can then easily spread. And you can see I was showing my napkin here from the process, and that's part of controlling for me, is when I'm trying to blend paints, if there's too much paint on my brush but I already have enough paint on the paper, I gotta wipe off whatever's on my brush so that I can easily blend it so it doesn't look like just kind of like a stamp, and it spreads out. And this is going back to adding highlights, adding texture, so we get that bumpiness of the orange. And now I'm making a dark green. I've added some violet to the sap green that was previously there, and adding more sap green because it was a little bit too purple. So on that paper is some of the dried gouache, because I've used the same paper over and over again. So, and now we're adding in the shadows to the leaf. I made the decision not to fully paint in this leaf because I just liked the way it looked. It made sense. It didn't need to be perfect. Like, I think in the reference that this leaf, it was like multiple leaves, like 2 or 3, and I kind of just truncated it. I said, you're like 1.5. It's like, yeah, sometimes when it comes to painting, it's really about the vibes. I'm not trying to make a photograph. If I wanted to make a photograph, I would just take a picture, you know? At least that's how I feel about painting. Some people love doing photorealism for painting. That's not me. I just do vibes, you know? And adding different values can help punch things up and move things along. And I'm taking that same green along the stems now just to give them more dimensions. And I'm still using that one brush. It's like a square 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 of an inch, maybe. And I skipped over it because I forgot to do the footage. But once the oranges dried, I painted that stem. And like I said, because it's opaque, it's fine that I painted over it. And now I'm switching brushes because we're going to do detail. And I was like, these oranges still aren't light enough, so we're going to make it even lighter for the highlights. And I did primarily a yellow with some white to add in more of the highlight kind of dealio. Just tickling it in the page, over the page. I truly do like doing still lifes. Oh, and I made this choice to add this line here, because I don't think it actually exists in the reference, but I added the line to further clarify the delineation between the two oranges. That's all. So it looks kind of like an outline, but it's like, ooh, is that a highlight? Is that an outline? I don't know. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to get it going. And this is always me looking between the reference and what's on my page and see what is clear versus my paper. And I think, as I was saying before I got interrupted by the switch of brushes, the reason why I enjoy doing still lifes, because even it's like, oh, it's just fruit, or it's some kind of inanimate object just chilling in some interesting light. I think it's a good exercise for painting overall, so you can learn the processes of getting textures and forms and other things, and how much do you need to paint in versus not. What could be a lost edge or what can be blurry and left up to the viewer to have their mind fill in, because then that can lend to interest. And you only can learn that through for me, learning is just through studies and practice like this. So I'm looking at the reference and I'm like, oh, this thing needs some shadows. So I decided to add the shadows and give them a purpley tinge because of the oranges being so orangey and like yellowy in certain parts. So I thought, since the light is yellow, a good counteraction, just because color theory, would be purple. And also it just would stand out separate from the background, which is more blue. So it's not a sharp contrast, it's just a delineation versus doing more dark blue shadows. I was like, yeah, let's do a purpley kind of deal, so that these are cast shadows and they're not a part of the background. I liked it. Tried it. I liked it. So that's why I did it. Who knows? If they were to have been blue, it may have given the painting a different feel. Who knows? Now I'm adding more highlights to the stem, because the stem was so dark. And I was like, this still needs a little something. And trickling it in. A few brush strokes here and there is all that is needed. And I think I go back over them a second time. Or a third time. I lost count how many times, if I'm going to be honest, because I was like, it's still just a little bit too dark from what I'm liking. Yeah, see that? Now that's a brighter, lighter green. I think I go through and add that just to pronounce things and where the light is hitting. Whenever I say light, like wherever the light hits, I think of the Lion King and Mufasa every time without fail. Wherever the light twitches, this is yours. Yeah, see, this is a much lighter green compared to what I had before. It's all on the same plan. This whole time I was painting, not once did I clear out the pan. On the next painting, what I'll do once I'm done with this one, I leave the pan as it is. It's still like that right now, dried up. And the next painting that I'll do is I will add water to it and swirl it all together and use that as my underpainting. That's how I got that grayish tone for the background. And then maybe tone it out. That way it's like not wasting paint, waste not, want not. And adds to the harmony. I do use a limited palette, so, and even more so this, because it didn't require much. I don't think I used that many colors. I think I used the red, the yellow, white, and sap green, and a little bit of violet and a little bit of blue. So it wasn't too much. And I'm just going back once again to highlight even more, make it brighter. Because as I'm working, I wait for things to dry to see how dark they are or how light they are, and continue. And also, don't be afraid to use your fingers. Well, if your paints aren't caustic or whatever, and these aren't. So sometimes trying to blend it out with another brush when just using the texture of the pad of my finger works really, really well. So I'm like, swipe, tap it in, and then swipe off a edge. And I went back after I had signed it because I was like, I thought I was done. And I looked at it and I was like, nah, needs more highlights. So that's why I'm back, even though it's signed. All right, and I'm just doing the finishing touches. I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me while I yap about art. Thank you for watching, and like, comment, subscribe, all those things. There's more to come. I'm trying to be more consistent with my posting. So I appreciate the support, and hope you make something today. Bye!